I am now going to talk about how this microgrid system, as seen in Kenya, has been applied to other impoverished areas. One example of a similar success story was seen in rural villages in India. The Energy Institute at Haas partnered with the startup company Gram Power to provide small, smart grid systems to unelectrified countries throughout India. Gram Power's goal was to allow unelectrified rural communities to transition from no power to simple model grid systems. These systems consist of off-the-shelf solar panels, module battery storage, and inverters. By 2030, the International Energy Agency has projected that microgrid systems will supply half of the newly connected households. This technology has the potential to bring clean, small-scale, self-contained electricity to remote areas that would otherwise face great expenses and complications from connecting to the centralized grid. This relatively new technology was taken to India, and although there was some success, the overall implications fell short of what was expected. Gram Power received grant funding, enough to deploy 40 microgrids in rural Rajasthan, India. At the time, there was a large-scale push to extend electricity access to all, and so the government was subsidizing private sector microgrid providers. Gram Power was to charge its customers just enough to cover its after-subsidy cost. This consisted of a one-time 1,000 Indian rupee connection fee, which is about $20, followed by a 20 rupee per kilowatt charge, which is about 40 cents per kilowatt. There would also be a 150 rupee per month fixed charge, which is about $3. The company projected to recover its costs in about 6 years if all the households paid for the power that they used, and if the solar PV systems ran at about a 13% capacity factor given the local operating conditions. The households were promised 24/7 electricity as long as consumption was limited to basic services like cell phone charging and lighting. Supply for higher wattage appliances such as refrigerators and fans was not guaranteed. The logistics and specifications of this project were well thought out and followed the best industry practices. However, unforeseen complications arose in the actual application of this technology. The first challenge faced by Gram Power was in finding customers. Villages that were unlikely to gain conventional grid access were visited, and of the 176 villages visited, only 10 were willing to implement microgrids. The main comment of those villages that turned down the offer was that they were waiting for real electricity. Although also local politicians had made election promises to connect to the centralized grid and were therefore against this small system technology. The government of India had also made strides towards providing electricity access for all, but in the fine print of this pledge, many households were left out of the promise of cheap, conventional grid power. This was still enough to dissuade many potential customers away from microgrids. Another challenge that came along with this technology was power theft. Gram Power had anticipated this challenge and installed technology that could identify and automatically shut off the specific systems that were being tampered with. They also hired trained local entrepreneurs to both maintain the system and also crack down on theft. But when it came to report theft, these individuals were very reluctant. The local entrepreneurs in charge of this responsibility often had strong relations with community members and did not want to penalize those doing wrong. They acknowledged theft was happening but would not disclose any further information, so the problem was cyclical. Even though there are still great demands for microgrids, private microgrid providers still face many challenges. They must cover their costs, which makes it challenging to compete with state-run utilities that are often losing money and cross-subsidizing poor rural customers. As for Gram Power in India, microgrid operations have been suspended and the company is now focused on selling prepaid smart meter units to centralized grid operators. The Indian government has been rethinking its rural electrification system and is now moving away from microgrids and towards solar home systems.